Well, folks, as always, this is our monthly CFL episode where David Morisuti and myself talk football, CFL Canadian football, that is. But also, we have another surprise guest. He was on here for the first couple shows. He wasn't supposed to be here, but he made another late appearance. And guys, you see him on the bottom here. You can hear him. Frank Stanishi, Candid Frank Live. Gentlemen, how are we doing on this fine August Thursday night?
I'm doing well. Just counting down the days where we're getting ready for that exhibition season where like that's kind of where the summer starts to fade.
It was always sad back in the day when we were in school just because it's this whole dynamic of for us, like the exhibition's like, hey, you have this like one last thing to do before you go back to school. But now it's just like kind of like changing of the season. But then with that comes more and more football with college and NFL right around the corner. But CFL season's in full high gear right now. Um, what's one thing from like the last few games that you've seen where it could be any team in the league that's really either surprised you in like a good way or surprised you in a way where you're kind of concerned at this point in August?
Frank, you want to start?
Um, what surprises me, I think, the biggest surprise is that what we expected really down deep with what we really, our expectations. Finally, some of the things we expected to happen are finally happening.
Yeah.
Example, the Ottawa Red Blacks playing the kind of way that one would have expected them to play for the last couple of years. The surprise is that after the disappointment of the last 2 years, finally this year, a lot of the promise that they started with bringing Mazzoli in that first year from Hamilton is finally working out. Mind you, without him, but still working out.
Yeah, I mean the Red Blacks. A lot of people see to look at that record and be like, "Oh, that must be a really good team." I'm still bullish on the Red Blacks. I think they've had a pretty favorable schedule, kind of off the hop. And I mean, as we're recording this, they're currently in a 3-3 abysmal tie right now with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So, I would say, and I know they lost Drew Brown. It just was announced a few minutes ago, so that's another interesting wrinkle into all of that, and probably explains part of the reason why the Red Blacks haven't exactly been well. But to me, the surprise has been kind of the fall, but then maybe potential rise of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Like they started off brutal.
Yeah.
Like this, it's not what we come to expect of the Blue Bombers. And in the last two games, their defense has decided to go to another level and just hold teams. Like they've held teams to a combined 16 points over the last two games. And the points that the other team scored were all in one game when Toronto scored. And and they shut out BC. Like to shut out a BC team, I know that BC Vern Adams got hurt at one point in the game, but you shut out a team like that, it sends a little bit of a message, I think, to the rest of the league that don't count out Winnipeg just yet. So I think that's probably the big surprise for me.
The one surprise for me has been honestly, it's not the fact of how Montreal's played, but it's the fact that ever since Fajardo's gone down, they've kind of held their own. And the fact too last week where it's like, hey, look at Hamilton. They got a couple wins in a row. I know it was a game where Toronto just like nothing played right. And Hamilton looked honestly great in that game. They won all on all three sides of the ball and they beat up on Edmonton. But the fact that Montreal went in there and just quieted them immediately kind of shows that Jason Moss has this team running on all cylinders and shows that, hey, it is a true next man up mentality. They are a true football team where we lose one piece, we see another piece emerge. Blanking on his name right now, the quarterback,
Zach.
Alexander. Yeah,
Oh yeah, Davis Alexander.
Davis Alexander's come in, even to I think lost Caleb Evans for the season this year, but they've just kind of shown that like, look, hey, you can punch us in the mouth, but we are going to get back up. They have that. Jason Moss has a Dan Campbell-esque quality to him, where he's never going to tell you what's bad. He's always just going to say, look, I believe in our guys. Our guys are good, and he's won a championship out of it. I want to make a point on Winnipeg, though, because Winnipeg's that true epitome of the season doesn't start until Labor Day, where it's, look, Toronto obviously, look, Sergio Castillo went wide left, but then last week, you punched BC right in the mouth. There's no other way to say it. You punch BC in the mouth. We'll see how BC responds this week with Jake Delgala. And then with Ottawa, I'm like David too, where I'm still bullish on them, but I'm only bullish because this is their first true test. If you look at, and they're undefeated at home too, even though it's raining there once again, which I feel like rain and Ottawa Red Blacks games go hand in hand, you know. But I want to see them play a good team, and that's why that BC home and home they have coming up, where they play in the, I believe, Touchdown Pacific, is going to be a good test for them too. And even a game like this, where even if they squeak out a 6-3 win or a 10-3 win, or knowing the CFL 4-3 win, classic hockey score, it'll be one of those things that can kind of show, hey, this Ottawa team, I don't know if they're ready, but they just have a new swagger to them, to where it's not like Calgary, where it's like, hey, how Calgary will get a win and then they'll lose the next week. Kind of preview for what I think is going to happen tomorrow night. But with Ottawa, they know how to bounce back properly.
Yeah, I mean,
Ottawa, I'll finish with Winnipeg. With you guys talking about Ottawa and Winnipeg, I'll add my 2 cents with Winnipeg. The only reason I'm not surprised that they didn't do well is because of the cap and losing a lot of guys over the winter, and then of course the simple fact that they had a lot of injuries starting the season. Key players, Oliveira, Dembski. They had some injuries that can impact a team that basically is paying a lot more to some of their guys, which means the depth gets affected a little bit. So I wasn't that surprised about Winnipeg not playing well, but I must admit, zero, being over was not what I was predicting about them. No. I'll grant that, but I wasn't surprised that they were having problems, that they were having difficulties. The same way, I guess, I wouldn't have felt any differently about the Argos and how they're. How they could have done a lot worse. They're more of a surprise because they're playing without their number one quarterback and they're 500.
Yeah, Toronto's the one that always surprises me, just because, look, they'll have the same thing too, where one week they look good, but then last week, though, I don't know what, it was different than the Hamilton game. Last week was just, look, defense looked a little off cue. The offensive line got, from what David seemed like, Frank, I only watched the last 10 minutes of the fourth quarter, but the offensive line just got bullied by the Calgary defense. Dukes has his moments where he's up and down, but that's why tomorrow night, I'm really excited to see what Nick Arbuckle does. But tomorrow also marks 9 games, so I feel like with the bye week coming up, I gotta wonder: are we gonna hear something soon? Are we gonna, what exactly is gonna happen at the quarterback position with Toronto going forward? And one thing I'll say is, I believe he's playing tomorrow night. I haven't read the full depth chart yet, but the loss for Wynton McManus last week was pretty much felt. He's that kind of heartbeat thumper guy, where when he's not in the lineup, you notice it immediately.
He is, but at the same time, I do think that the Argos have built really good depth. I think Jonathan Jones.
I meant a captaincy standpoint, a leadership standpoint.
Yeah, the leadership for sure. I talked to the guys about that last week, and they said, look, not having him back there kind of does not help in that regard. Yeah. They do feel like, he's like a brother to them, right? He's been playing for so long, right? This is a player that many believe they should have even had a chance in the NFL. Yep. For a long time ago, and it just never happened. So, that part really does get felt, and they're just so banged up back there. You look at the injured list for this Argos team, and look, every team is dealing with injuries right now, not just Toronto. I'm never gonna be I'll cry for the Argos because they all have injuries. I'm not that person. Yep. But I counted at least 7 to 8 regulars just on defense that I could say that could play over, right? And so that's not easy. And it's not just the players they lose, it's the types of players that they're going to lose, right? And I think when some people ask me, is this going to be a 1-game thing? I said if it was going to be a 1-to-1, they would just do the 1 game each time. The fact he's on the 6 means they expect this to be, especially it's a groin injury, they're expecting this to be a lengthy absence, because they don't want Wynn to come back early from this, and then later down the year you're again dealing with another injury because they didn't let this one heal properly. So it hurts. I I think there's other areas of that defense though that are hurt more by injuries than the win one. I think Jonathan Jones has proven he's a quality linebacker in this league. And they've pieced together other parts of this defense kind of on the fly a little bit here. So to me, the win one, it hurts. You see a guy like that, a CFL All-Star out. I just think that there's a lot more that this team has had to deal with that they just makes it so tough.
Yeah, it's just like I don't want to walk back my comments. I was just trying to say like the leadership aspects of what McMahon is bringing.
You're not wrong on that. That's not a wrong comment to make on that. I do think
though it's DBs that have been more affected by injury though than linebackers.
Oh yeah. I think injury when you're talking about also just the caliber of play, the drop off of play, it's a little more apparent when you see what the Argos put out for their DBs versus what other teams have put out, or even what the Argos have put out in past years, right? So I think that gets kind of lost in the shuffle sometimes.
The elephant in the room, though, is the fact that they're playing without their number one quarterback.
Yep.
Yeah, he's the ultimate.
That's the elephant in the room.
I still think with that too, though, because their schedule is very interesting coming up because they have the 2 home games coming up now. They have tomorrow night against Calgary, and then they have for side notes for folks out there, I won't be at the game tomorrow night. Bob, I'll be back for Saskatchewan in 2 weeks. But the fact that they have the bye week and then Saskatchewan, if they say to him, hey, you're eligible to return after Saskatchewan, do you really think it's best for... I know Chad's a good quarterback who could play whenever, but do you really think that him returning in Labor Day, which honestly, if that's his first game back, regardless, if he's playing in that game, Tim Hortons Field is going to be a very, very hostile environment that Monday afternoon. So because you have the Hamilton game, you have at Ottawa, and you have at BC. So I still think that if it is 9 games, you got to find a way to play him against the Rough Riders, even though it's still catch-22 though, because Corey Mace knows him very well, and that defense will be prepared for Kelly. But that's the only thing I worry about is where if they're like, hey, we're going to start Chad against Hamilton, that's his first game back. It was bad for him last time. Like when I was there a few weeks ago at Tim Hortons Field, there was shame signs everywhere, and their fans are going to be on him. But if that's his first game back, I don't want to say like when LeBron returned to Cleveland, but it's not going to be a pleasant environment. So it's very interesting to see how not only the league handles his return, but how the team from a football ops standpoint handles the return. I think it's up to the league more about the man, but then it's more to the team about from a football standpoint.
Well, that's the big one here, right? They are waiting for the league to give them
green light,
the A-OK before they even have them at practice. Like, I hate to use the line, but before we can even talk about the game, we got to start talking about practice for Kelly.
We're talking practice, not a game.
Because Ryan Dinwiddie made it clear to me that they're not just going to throw him out there. So, like, people say, oh, he's eligible to come up against Saskatchewan. They're on a bye, so they can't even practice. They're not practicing next week. He, in my opinion, Labor Day seems more, I think, closer to where you can expect that return to happen. It might even be after, because they might want a week or two of just him practicing, and maybe in practice he shows that he's ready to go. I don't know. That might be a little too. It's asking a lot. I know that he's, it's not like he's been sitting around at home not doing anything, but he's also he hasn't been playing with the team, right? He hasn't. He takes time to build up the rapport with the receivers, to know how to react to things that are happening in the game, right? They don't want to just throw them out there like that. Not like they can go and throw him in a simulated game or put him in another league to get him ready. Like, he's got to play right off the hop. It's always tough. It's like coming back from an injury. I get, like, you can maybe use that terminology. Like, it's like he's coming off a long-term injury, and I think that's how they're going to work around that. But yeah, the Argos are kind of in a tough spot because it's all about the league.
Yeah.
To tell them, you can do this, you can't do this, but they haven't given them any direction really.
Do you also think maybe that?
Well, you've got a quarterback.
I'll let Frank go.
Go ahead, Frank.
Okay. When you look at him coming back, you want to talk about injury. I get that. but in effect, I think the one advantage that they might be able to tap into is if the adrenaline level, which is going to be extremely high, he's not coming back from an injury in the real sense. I understand that in the pseudo real sense, but in the real sense, he's been itching to play. He's been trying and mentally prepared to play, in his head prepared to play. That first game he comes back, it's going to be all adrenaline. It's going to be all adrenaline, and he's going to be, if they can figure out a way to tap into that energy level that he's going to have in that first game, it could be very good or very bad. As we all know in sports, in these kinds of situations, anything can happen. But as far as when that happens, as long as the team's ready mentally for him to come back, because I believe one of the problems the Argos are having in concentrating offensively is because I think some of the players know who the number one quarterback is, and not that they're not trying for their present number one quarterback. They still got a little bit of a distraction because that other guy's coming back. He's mentally, he's their number one quarterback, and the whole team works towards that guy being the number one quarterback. His adrenaline, that fact, it's going to be interesting when he comes back. And I'll be honest with you guys, I don't think it matters when he comes back. If he plays before when they get a bye, then that'll be good, because then he'll have a chance to basically figure out what he did. He'll have more time. Once the adrenaline's gone, now he's got to get physically and mentally on the same page as reality, as opposed to how much he wants to play and how well he wants to play.
It's also good too, the fact that because remember last year how they had to make pseudo bye weeks for guys when they were hurt down the stretch of the season, September, October. This year, I believe it's Thanksgiving weekend that they have their bye. So you know what? It's not, and obviously there's only 2 games left after that against Ottawa and Edmonton. But the fact that there still is that bye week there, that there still is that chance to correct mechanics instead of doing it on the fly, you can have a chance to sit them down and hey, recoup and revisit. I was just thinking we all know that Labor Day, what it means. We all know that. Look, Toronto and Hamilton, like I was saying, when I was there a few weeks ago covering the game for the team, which they gave me credentials, they thought I was with the team, and I was like, cool. But with the environment there, they were already on Kelly. So that's what I'm just thinking about from a mental psyche standpoint, and just for the overall impact of not of the game, but just what the environment you are walking into, because it could be Doug Flutie, it could be, name a former Argonaut quarterback suiting up. It's going to be hostile. It's just the fact that you have a quarterback under much scrutiny and you're giving fuel to what's called the Tabby fire at Tim Hortons Field, the Tiger Cat fire. I'm just wondering about that. Does Dinwiddie put that into consideration, or is it a football thing? The other thing I want to make point of too is just the fact that, hey, maybe if you wait and then I was going to say wait, but I was going to go some another point, because I really like Frank's whole thing about where it's the thing. It's kind of those wind up cars where you just turn the key and turn the key and turn the key. Eventually, those cars run out of juice, and I feel like that's what Kelly could be when he comes back, where he's just too excited, too fast. But then that could cause problems to make mistakes. That's the big thing to watch out for, I think.
Well, that's it, right? You have to remember, when was the last time he played a game? Last time he played a game, he played his worst game ever.
Worst day to have your worst day.
Right? So that has to be on the back of everyone's mind when you're thinking about bringing him back. The mental part of it too, I think. The physical part, I mean, he's working out. You see him on social media posting all the posts of him working out. I think physically that's not the issue. It's the mental approach to coming back that's always the toughest, especially a quarterback, right? Because he's gonna want to come out, and he wants to be coming out with a purpose right out of the gate. We all know Chad Kelly. We know he's not a guy that's gonna play it safe. It's never not been his the way he does things. So I think that's something that the Argos are going to have to really work on with him, is not making sure he's physically ready, making sure he's mentally ready for that return.
That's why I say Labor Day is such an issue. Before Frank speaks,
I want to support what you said, Griff, as far as the battle between Toronto and Hamilton. One point we haven't made the team immediately ahead of the Hamilton Tiger Cats is, and which is the team that they can overtake to make the playoffs. You want to add some hype? I'm just saying. I'm just adding hype that you're talking about with Hamilton, Toronto. You've got the third place team playing the fourth place team twice.
Yeah.
In which, because I'll be honest with you guys, like I know I keep referencing the game that I was at, but I was the lone Argonaut reporter there on like solely focused on the team on July 20th. But the attendance that day was only at 22,000, which doesn't seem like a lot for like it doesn't seem like a lot of people, but for Hamilton, it was a very porous crowd, and that game was exactly what Hamilton needed to get them fired up, just from an on-field standpoint to an off-field standpoint. Like even, are you guys Seinfeld fans, or like if I say a reference, will you guys?
Yeah,
Understand?
you could probably say something like that.
When it comes to soup.
So it's not a soup Nazi reference. It's from the David Putty episode where remember when they were at the funeral and it's like the Jerry got the glass tickets for the Ranger game.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so basically Frank, not Frank Stanishi, but Frank McLean from Hamilton basically said Orlando Stein after the BC game gave him like the funeral nod where it's just like it's all looking bleak and downhill, but then that's the game that really sparked them. So I'm just thinking of the mental standpoint for Labor Day to where if Chad were to come back in that game and play terribly, it's not just like anywhere else where, hey, they're going to give it to you. They're going to give it to you and then some. It's like, it's like the Simpsons thing, stop it, he's already dead. It's the same thing. It's going to be just, that's why I'm just thinking with Tim Hortons Field. If he goes, because one of two things can happen. One, he can either go in there and be the Chad Kelly we know he can be and absolutely just quiet Tim Hortons Field. It can just be that. But it can also be the place too where they are on your back for 3.5 hours on a what last year was burning hot Labor Day Monday. So the whole thing of it's interesting too. But the other point to it as well is they have such a quick turnaround with travel to where then they have to go to Ottawa and play Saturday afternoon, unless they have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 3 days to get ready for the Ottawa Red Blacks, which could be a very pivotal game at that point too, considering like, look, how we say Ottawa's starting to ramp it up to where you could play them against Ottawa as well. And then, hey, you got BC where Vernon Adams Jr. should be back. And we all know from week one, I remember I asked Ryan Diddy that question and Third Down Nation stole it, but I made sure I was the one because I was the one who asked him that. Because we know how much Dinwiddie wants to go to Vancouver and win. We know he has problems winning in Calgary and BC, but if he can go into BC Place Stadium and win, maybe it catapults something to where they get a second win in BC Place this year.
I mean, yeah, with the way things are going right now, it's really getting to the point where the Argos they're never going to be a convenient time for them to do all this, right? And I talked to some people about it, and I said, look, he did the suspension, he did the time, he did what the CFL asked of him. The CFL has to obviously make a decision to rip the Band-Aid off because it is going to happen. And look, Chad, it could get to a point too if the CFL is dragging their heels with that. CFLPA could get involved.
Yes.
Right. They could be like, okay, he's done what you've required. What else does he have to do? Like, I just know those things are gonna like the CFL has to make this as tidy as possible. I do get that, but from the Argos, all these things you just mentioned, the Argos are thinking this themselves, and they're probably going to the CFL saying, we're in a very important time right now of our season. Like Frank, we've said it all the time on our show. The season doesn't start till Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts. But it starts on Labor Day. That's just it.
And that's why I think Labor Day seems like the most likely time for him to come back because they're on the bye next week. They get ready for the Saskatchewan game. Unless he's ready for that Saskatchewan game, which I don't know if he's going to be. That's only 1 week's worth of practice. That's why I think you might just be waiting for Labor Day because you've got more time to prepare for it.
The storylines that can emerge from that game would be something. That's the other thing too. Besides the whole fan factor, you have media. So like we already know that media is already well established at Tim Hortons Field, that there's probably going to be a little bit more fanfare to get out there. Because apart from it, it's his quarterback returning from controversy. You know what? I also agree. I always thought Saskatchewan was like the play it safe approach. You got to rip the Band-Aid off with this one, but also here's the other thing too. There's 11 days between Saskatchewan and Hamilton. You give him 11 days to get ready for a game of that magnitude. The Argonauts might be playing with a little bit of swag, if you know what I mean.
Well, that's what they need. See, the whole thing of all this is that they only play 18 games this season.
Yeah.
18 games. That's all you play. And right now they're 500. What happens in Calgary or in Toronto against Calgary is important, because another loss puts Hamilton in the position where they really got a shot to make the playoffs, right? And they could create a situation where it's in their own destiny. On the flip side of that, there's a lot of pressure on the Argos to be successful. This is a team that knows full well how good they're supposed to be. And we know that, they've earned the right to be respected, and they're going to demand that they be respected. But the thing that David mentions, and that's the part that makes it hard for the Argos, is the key injuries that they've had. The fact that their number one quarterback, as I said, the elephant in the room is they haven't had their number one quarterback, and they're not going to have their number one quarterback. They're going to have, their pseudo quarterback in. We don't know who he's going to be that first game. You know what? Do we really know what he's going to be his second game? We're questioning when he's going to play. Then add to that, how is he going to play at the beginning? We're at the point in the season where you don't want to give Hamilton a door to crash through if you're the Argos, because you're the only thing between them and Hamilton not making the playoffs. And being in that position with everything you said, Griff, which I agree with 100%, Hamilton revolves around the fact their fans, their team, their media revolves around the fact that Hamilton has to beat Toronto again, because it's always the same thing. But now there's even more at stake, right?
That's it, because like I've been saying this all off season, and I've been saying this. I know, look, Toronto once went 31 years without a Grey Cup win. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers just went 29 years. This is year 25 since the Hamilton Tiger Cats have won a Grey Cup. Every other team in the CFL has won a Grey Cup since 2010. Never mind the year 2000 anymore. So it just causes this to where, look, Hamilton plays Montreal Saturday night. We'll see what happens. Then they play Edmonton coming up next week. I don't know who they play in between Toronto, but you know that if they win on Labor Day, with everything involved, with standings involved, you wash 0-6 out the window. You kick down the door to, hey, guess what? 2 weeks, because 3 weeks later, you get to go to BMO Field and have a chance to sweep Toronto if it comes to that. For Hamilton, I know a lot of people like to say that football is life and football is that. I mean, look, at the end of the day, too, we all cover the Toronto Argonauts. It's what we get to do. We get the access that a lot of people wish they had. But at the end of the day, too, we're fans, and we know that, look, we're big brother to their little brother. It's the way it is. I know Hamilton has more fan support, and I know that. But the fact that if they can get one up, especially with all the controversy, you start to see it online. You start to see it bleed into the stadium. Like I was telling David beforehand, when I'm going to reference that game one more time. I was trying to do a video feature on the rivalry, just in general. Spoke to Adam Goss, amazing. He gave me an amazing interview. But I tried talking to Hamilton fans in the stadium, and they basically would not give me the time of day. They basically just said if they no interest and that they would not say anything I'd be able to publish, which I'm just like, okay, cool, if you're going to be that way. So for them, it just means more to that, to where it's that kickstart, kind of like what we saw with Montreal last year. And if I'm rambling, guys, I apologize. But you know how Montreal last year, they were 0-7 against great teams, except for the 2 games that truly, truly mattered.
I can already see the headlines. If Chad Kelly plays in Labor Day game, the Argos win. The amount of complaints that you will hear, oh, he shouldn't be playing. Of course, they're going to make him play, allow him to play against Hamilton, this and that. I can already see that coming out too.
You're getting either end of the spectrum that's just going to be either like far off to one side or far off to one side. You're not going to get anything that's a meaningful opinion or take on Twitter. Sorry to cut you off, David. I just wanted to make that point.
I totally agree. So it's gonna be it's gonna be a totally interesting scenario, though.
That's the beauty of the Canadian Football League. And more importantly, that's the beauty of the Hamilton-Toronto rivalry. I'm old enough, guys, to remember, and I'm going to say this, not ashamed, but I'm going to say that I've seen a lot of different scenarios where Hamilton and Toronto have played. I've seen a lot of them. But, I'm trying as hard as I can to think of a time where this particular scenario, where the two of them, I'm sure there's been, but what makes this really special is that there we watch every year where it doesn't matter what's at stake. A game between Hamilton and Toronto is awesome, but this is a question of you make the playoffs or I make the playoffs. That's what this boils down to, and the rivalry matches the situation here. It totally matches the situation.
It's just fuel. It's almost gasoline to the fire if he plays. It just adds that extra. So whenever Toronto makes their trip down the QEW, you're just going to see their bus, but then just a trail of fire following in behind it, which I know. I always wonder this if they just go there on the day of the game or not, but I know last time they stayed overnight in Hamilton and then they go back after the game. That's according to Murph. But no, where it all stands right now, it kind of is the building blocks to Vancouver, where I feel like in the league, I just want to go to the league for a whole. I feel like for the first time just looking at the CFL landscape, there's not a clear favorite anymore. Like how last year it was, Winnipeg's the team. I know BC's been the team, but with Vernon Adams hurt, there's a lot of uncertainty there. With the way Saskatchewan's losing 7-3 right now, and there's that. Montreal without a quarterback, like I said, I know they've been chugging along, but we don't know if they can sustain it or not. I'm just trying to state the obvious. So,
like if you're looking, obviously everyone would say, well, maybe we're not giving Montreal its due. I also just think Montreal got off to such a hot start. Obviously, the injury to Fajardo kind of cooled things down a little bit, but there is a thing that's getting too much momentum early. The schedule is also, again, I always play the schedule part. Schedule looks
2023
favorable,
Argos.
right? Like there is a little bit of that in there. You know, Montreal's a team where the opponent needs to figure out how to make them beat themselves, make mistakes. Montreal doesn't want to make mistakes.
Yep.
They do play it safe, in not a bad way sometimes, but it's not the most exciting brand of football, in my opinion. Like, they don't exactly. They're a very tough team to play against. Like that's very true. Their defense has gone so much better from what we saw at the beginning of last year to the Grey Cup run. So like it really is. I mean, it is always the champion's advantage in the CFL, right? The Grey Cup advantage to have like that ability to know how to get there. I just think that the West is wide open.
Yes.
I don't think there's any team in the West right now that can totally lay claim to the division. In the East, it's Montreal, and then because of the start they got off to, it's everybody else. It's me a dogfight for 2 and 3. Some people are saying, "Oh, could the crossover come to play?" I don't think so. I don't think the teams in the East are as that bad. That I just don't think that's the case. I mean, anything can happen. We have seen it before, but yeah, it's like 2 and 3. That's the real battle right now, in my opinion, in that East Division.
When it comes to the league and the performance of each team, this is the most inconsistent season I've seen in the Canadian Football League, at least over the past 10, 12 years, where, Griff, to your point that there hasn't been a dominant team, or maybe dominant teams would be a more accurate statement. There really aren't dominant teams in the league right now. Montreal is pretty much the only dominant team, and the only team, guys, that we can say have been, for the most part, a consistent team that plays basically to a level and an even level throughout the season. We've seen BC falter. We've seen, of course, Winnipeg falter. We're watching Saskatchewan falter. Well, I don't know if you can call what Edmonton's doing faltering, but and we've seen Calgary falter. All 5 of those teams, if Edmonton becomes a team that understands how to play the game, and they can regain this reset with the firing of the previous head coach, they could add an interesting situation in the Western Division as well. And considering they play each other more against each other than they do playing with the East, this is one season where you pretty much have a lock that there's no crossover. And I don't know how long it's been since we've been able to say that, where there's not going to be a crossover this early in the season before Labor Day. I don't think there's going to be a crossover, basically because of the scheduling and the way it works, and the inconsistency of the West as a whole. We've got Ottawa that probably, if I said they were more consistent than anybody in the West, I don't think I'd be saying something that unusual.
Does someone out there, just so, because obviously my viewership's more American than Canadian, do you guys want to take a quick chance to describe the crossover just for anyone who's new to the CFL?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's real simple. We have two divisions. It's not a balanced two divisions. There's 5 teams in the Western Division. There's 4 in the Eastern Division. We allow a team in one division that has more points in the other division that's in 4th place. In other words, 3 teams make the playoffs, unless the 4th team in one of the division has to have at least one more point than the team in the other division. So in other words, if an Eastern team is going to be a crossover team, the 4th place team in the Eastern Division has to finish the season with one more point than the 3rd place team in the Western Division. I hope I explained it well enough.
Another way to explain this too, let's give an NFL reference. If the NFC South was so bad that a team shouldn't make it out of the NFC South, a crossover in the NFL would make so much sense, where you take a team that has a stacked division, have one of them crossover because they have a better record than the best team in the NFC South or whatever. Like, what it does is it keeps a team that should have made the playoffs, but because there's only 3 playoff spots in each division, it allows that maybe that 4th team either side to cross over and say, you deserve to be in the playoffs. You take this team spot because they don't deserve it.
Thank you, gentlemen. I just wanted that just for the viewers out there to kind of because so instead of them scratching their heads going, oh, crossover, what's that? Now you know. Also, quick update from tonight. Ottawa is currently up 7-3 on Saskatchewan. So good football score, but not the conventional way to get to 7-3 that most.
Were there any power play goals in that game?
Let me check. Lewis Ward, yes, he's had 2 power play goals in the night from 14 and 28 yards, and R. Leone with a 80-yard punt with a dead ball. So we have 3 field goals and a rouge. So Ottawa, you're getting a treat tonight in the nation's capital.
Yeah, now you have to explain to your American fans what a rouge is.
Oh, 1 point. That the rouge is what makes the. There's 3 things about the CFL that I prefer that I really wish the NFL would do. The rouge is just fun. That's the CFL uniqueness. There's 2 main things though. The kickoff. I don't know how the CFL's gotten it so right and the NFL's gotten it so wrong. But the 18-game season, because we all know in the NFL that the 17th game getting added is a gateway to get to 18. If you want to see how 18 works, look at what the CFL does, because they've been able to pull off 18 games for I don't know how many years now, but look, each team gets 3 bye weeks, which is crazy, but also the playoffs is only 3 weeks shorter. But adding an 18th game also gets Family Day the day after the Super Bowl to be a national holiday, so you get it in Canada and America. Boom, problem solved. That's how we do it. I gotta go back to captions, gentlemen, because I'm gonna display the Ottawa versus Saskatchewan game because these graphics were made last night, but David's internet provider decided to be bad and not have him have his time of day. I don't know who you're with, but that internet provider.
Yeah, let's not throw any. Well, I wish I would, but let's keep them out. I don't want to give any free.
You don't want to throw a future employer under the bus.
Not only that, I just don't even want to give them airtime right now, because that's just
oh, that's real anger. That's real anger. That's white hot anger.
We love it. The only update I gotta say for tonight's game with Ottawa and Saskatchewan is that Ottawa is actually currently covering the 3.5 point spread. But tomorrow night, Toronto at Calgary. I'm gonna keep my pick simple. I saw the disappointment in Dinwiddie's face after last Sunday's game and the fact that he didn't blame any player for what happened, that he blamed himself. This is a bounce back for Toronto, also because of this. This is why I do not trust the Calgary Stampeders, because every time they find a way to win, they will lay an egg the following week. If you want a perfect example, look at 2 weeks ago. They beat BC. The next week, Ottawa just knocks their socks off at home. They beat them 33-6. I'm not saying the same thing is going to happen tomorrow night, but I think Toronto wins by at least 3 points, if I had to guess.
My issues, if I were to do a bet for this game, I would probably even take the under. I just think Toronto's offense has been such a disappointment the last few weeks. I don't know how much better it's going to be under Arbuckle, personally, unless he really gets a chance to really air things out and guys start making plays. And even like Calgary, like they only got one running back dressed for this game, which I've never seen before in the CFL.
Worked for him last week.
It did. I mean, it's going to be more Jake Mare throws, and Calgary is so bad on the road for some strange reason that I don't know if it's going to. I personally think this is going to be not. I wouldn't say exactly like the Winnipeg Toronto game, but I think it could have. We could be going into that territory. I think two teams that didn't have a lot of time to prep for this game, even though they just played against each other. I think that kind of short week will play into it a little bit too.
0-4 on the road. I did not realize that with Calgary. They're 0-4 on the road.
Yeah.
They're 4-0 at home.
Actually, 5-0 at home.
No,
Oh,
they're
sorry,
4-0.
No,
they're 4-0 on the road. And they're 0-4 at home.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Toronto is. Toronto's 3-1 at home, but then they're 1-3 on the road.
Yeah.
Mirror images. As far as I'm concerned, I think Toronto will win this. A lot to do with the hunger that the coach is going to instill in his players, and the fact that there's a lot of pride in that. There's a lot of pride in that room. There are players who could have played better against Calgary and did not. They're going to get a chance to show how good they are, and so I'm picking Toronto, but I agree with David. It's going to be a close one. This is going to be another one of those games where a field goal is going to make the decision.
And you know what? You have two excellent kickers on either side. You have Liram and you have Rene on for Calgary. So it's gonna come down to that. But one player I want to label as an X factor for Toronto, because I feel like he's been, I don't want to say hit or miss, but he's been like had his moments this year, but he's also hasn't. That's DeMonte Coxey. I feel like he could be a potential X factor. I know he had a big game last year against Calgary, but I love, Frank, that you say that it could come down to field goals, because if you remember last year's game in Toronto, it came down to, well, now one of the fastest men in the CFL, the fastest man in the CFL, who's now in Edmonton, but it came down to a Javon Leake punt return. So I feel like in that game too was 39-31, I think. This game I can see like a 20-17 or like let's say a fun score. Let's say like a, 18-14 or something like that. Just I'm going to throw a Rouge in there just for fun. Like I can't see a thrilling game, but I could see a nail-biting, gritty game to that Toronto can go into the bye week being like, hey, we got our step back. We're 5-4. Another win against Saskatchewan in 2 weeks, and we're 6-4.
And they should play like they've got a bye week next week. They should be very physical. They should not leave anything on the field, and I figure they'll mention that. I think that'll be one of the motivators that the coaches and the leaders on the team are going to say, look, we got a bye week. Let's play like there's no tomorrow, because guess what? There's no tomorrow.
Nope,
yeah, I think that's a good point.
They literally jump off they basically go in tomorrow, then they go to, I don't know if they're going to go on vacations and stuff like that. I saw Ottawa has bye week. They were going to there's guys in Italy and stuff like that. I don't know where the Toronto players would go, but you got to imagine if Kelly gets reinstated, which we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But if he does, you got to imagine he's probably going to start throwing with the guys and stuff like that. Because the only reports I've heard of that is that he's been doing it after practice, because if he's there during practice, he gets in trouble. But I know after practice, he's been trying to build a rep. But we'll ultimately see what happens tomorrow night. And gentlemen, I know the two of you are going to knock it out of the park tomorrow night at BMO Field.
And don't forget also that he's going to have his guys are going to hang around. There's relationships that are developed even when they're backup quarterbacks and then they become starters. Every quarterback's had those guys that they were on the the backup team. So those guys, I think, are going to stick around, and they're going to help. They're going to help the most they can to get Kelly ready for his first game.
Exactly. And then Saturday night we have a rematch of which last week was just a pure ass whipping between Montreal and Hamilton. I briefly looked up what Hamilton has before Labor Day, and they have Montreal, but then they have Edmonton and Winnipeg. So I think with Edmonton with Hamilton, it's a real shit or get off the pot kind of game right here. But I'm sorry, until I'm not going to pick against Montreal at Molson Stadium. I'm just not. I think this is another convincing win for Montreal, just because also if you go back and look at it, most of their games except for one, Montreal has won by at least 10 points in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I like Montreal knows how to play Hamilton. They've had their number the last few years, and for me with Hamilton, that defense has not like
Their
like
DBs have been
their offense has been fine. I mean, it hasn't been great, but it's been better than last year. But that defense has taken such a step back that I think you can I would be comfortable going money line on Montreal. Do I do the lay the 7.5? That's a lot of points. Especially in a rematch. You got to be also consider the rematch. Teams tend to play better. The losing team tends to play better because they can clean up more of the mistakes. There's more mistakes to point out and fix. But I still think Montreal, like this is a game where they should be able to win, no problem.
Well, if Hamilton wins, it'll be a shocker for me. Montreal, if Montreal loses against Hamilton in this next game, we're going to learn something about Montreal that none of us believed before that game.
Oh, yeah. This is a real game where Montreal can either show the league, hey, we are who we are, or it can be that game where I don't. With Hamilton, I'm kind of saying it. David, do you know the meme, the gif of like where it's like the guy in the Big Bird legs where it just kicks in the door and it's just the leg, like you just see the leg standing there? Hamilton has the chance to do something like that in a few weeks, and this could be the start of that if they win this game. But like I said, I've been saying this in my betting videos all year long with the CFL. We basically pick against Hamilton until they prove us wrong, which they did. But then last week they kind of regressed to the mean. So, like I said, their only wins this year have been against Toronto when they were clicking on all cylinders and they needed it, and you just felt it. And then the other one was against a lowly Edmonton team, which got their coach. I think that was the game. No, that wasn't the game that got Chris Jones fired, but it was the game that basically got MBT fired from being QB1. And speaking of Edmonton, Trey Ford takes on Jake Dogala Sunday night at 7 p.m. from Commonwealth Stadium. I know Trey Ford has looked like Trey Ford, and I know there's no Vernon Adams Jr. in this game, but I just don't see a world where BC, it's the same sort of energy with Toronto where Rick Campbell will get the guys going. I think this is a game that, like, look, if you want to bet for this game, that over 49.5, I think is the number to go with, because Trey Ford can make magic happen, but BC's going to want to score points, because here's the thing with Dogala. He just can't turn the ball over, and you've got, I believe, Hatcher, you've got McInnes, you got Stanbeck. Just get them the ball and, let them do the rest. And like with this game with BC, I think this is a bounce back game for BC more than a statement game for Edmonton.
It's a crucial game for BC. Like, they've lost 2 in a row.
Yep.
You lose to a team that hadn't won in forever. So that's already that already gives a bad taste in your mouth.
You got your doors blown off.
Yeah. I just think that Edmonton has found something right now, a groove that makes them very dangerous. They got nothing to lose right now. They got a quarterback that's trying to prove that he can be a starter. You got a bunch of guys who, when you get when a coach gets fired, like what happened with Jones, you're just you play differently, and I think that's Edmonton's starting to do that. But at the same time, I don't know how many you can really expect to. How many times you can expect BC to have a performance like that? I don't see that happening back to back in games.
I think I agree with you guys as far as BC is concerned, what to expect from them. But what I like about Edmonton is that this is this, we talk about teammates supporting each other, believing in each other, the family thing that
Yep.
football breeds. And this is a family that they brought a stranger in to carry the team. And look, David and I have always wondered why Trey Ford hasn't started. David, the one thing we've never mentioned on our show, and I think it's time to mention it, and that is, I wonder how the players feel about the chances he wasn't given, and how hard they'll play for him, how hard they played for him to have that game they had, right? And now, how hard will they play for him for the next game? I really think that he's the guy that can stir the drink, just because he is the biggest example of the reclamation project, the successful reclamation project that is the Edmonton Eskimos. Players have a lot of pride. They're a family, and they see a chance for something to build on. Like you said, David, they're on a bit of a run, and they're on a run with a guy that I don't think in that locker room, I can't believe in that locker room, there aren't a lot of guys that go, it's about time this kid had a chance. Let's make it happen for him.
For me, like I said, I'm just going to go, because I know Edmonton's looked good, but it's just the fact that this is more of a statement game for the Lions to kind of show the rest of the league, hey, we are who you think we are. We are the team that's been labeled the favorites. Another storyline with all this right now is the MOP. If Vernon Adams Jr., which I think it's like Winton, they're not going to rush him back. They're going to wait till he's 100% to play VA again. But for BC, it's kind of that world where, hey, you were expected to go in and you were expected to host the Grey Cup this year, and you were expected to be in as host team. My whole thing with it is just like I said, the 2 losses in a row and the fact that Rick Campbell's going to know how to get his guys fired up. I think this game goes either way. It's just something inside me is saying go with BC. But with Edmonton, I just looked it up while David was talking. Edmonton hasn't beaten BC in Edmonton since 2019. And they haven't beaten BC since 2021. So those are just a couple things to look at. But the score of that game, by the way, was 19-6 when Edmonton last beat BC. I believe it was October 12th, 2019. So we'll ultimately wait and see what happens. But this feels more than ever. This feels like a really pivotal week where storylines can emerge, and we can start to decipher the pretenders from the contenders. I know it's still any. I don't even want to say any given Sunday, because look, that's an expression I use for the NFL. But any given week in the CFL, anyone can win. And we'll wait and see what happens. And I'm going to check on Winnipeg and not Winnipeg. They're on their bye week, so maybe we should check in on them. But 10-10 right now in Ottawa. So
we got a burner going on, guys.
We got a barn burner. So after this podcast, I might turn on the TV, and while I'm editing this, I'll watch overtime. But we'll see what happens.
I'm having a brain cramp. Is this week 11 coming up?
This is week number 10.
It's week number 10? Okay.
Yes.
Well, this is the week that everybody's going to go, remember week 10? Like, to your point, is the people are going to look back to this week and say that's when it started for this team.
Yeah, it's kind of like how yes, because last year was always that game where I always wonder if Toronto had lost to Montreal in Montreal that September Friday night, what would have happened with the Argonauts? And one other point I want to make before we sign off, but you guys were talking about earlier how teams get off to a hot start too quickly. That kind of happened with Toronto last year. They kind of found their way back. But the fact that they have that October bye week then they only have 2 games left in the season is going to be crucial, considering they have that tough stretch right there where you play Montreal and Winnipeg. Also a fun little wrinkle I saw. Montreal and Winnipeg play each other the last game of the regular season. I'm not saying it's going to be a Grey Cup preview, but that's a game where it can be make or break for either team to maybe get home field or make the playoffs.
It's going to be man. Like I always say, no team is ever really out of it until the standings tell them just it's not happening.
So is that all next to your name?
Yeah, really. You can tell. Like for Edmonton, is it over? I wouldn't say no, because not right now. I think a couple more losses. I think once you get to that double-digit loss total, which I mean they're 3 away. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. Like even like for Hamilton, like we're talking about the fight. you get a couple wins under your belt, you're looking a lot better for yourself if the other teams start losing. But the problem is Ottawa has gotten such a good start. Toronto is staying at 500. Even being at 500 for Toronto has been good enough because Hamilton's just got off to such a poor start. How many times do they do this themselves? Like, so to me, it's like you wait until the double digit loss total comes in, and that's where I kind of say, all right, curtains.
The season boils down to don't lose that game, because that's what it all in football. It comes down to that game. There's no 4-game series win. It's one game. And that's what's in everybody's head, to get in the position where they can win that game and not lose it. And we've got a lot of teams that can put themselves in the position early, like you mentioned, guys, the teams that are struggling to get wins. They don't want to lose that game that eliminates them. But there's also every game that's played to determine who gets home field advantage, all that lovely stuff. So football's a great game because every game is important. It has its own importance, and there's no backup plan. You got to win that game, and it's going to be interesting down the rest of the way.
It is. And I looked at Edmonton's schedule quickly. After this week, they go to at Hamilton and then at Montreal. So they really got kind of suckered by the football gods on that one, where, hey, you go from Edmonton, you got to go out to Hamilton. Then you probably go back home. And then you got to go all the way out to Montreal. And then for the month of September, they play Calgary and Winnipeg. That's it. So that's another quick game right there where I feel like that could almost be like a make or break game for a season, that 2-game stretch there with Edmonton and Calgary come Labor Day and then the Saturday following. Is there a name for that game, or is it just they always Labor Day
Which game? Repeat.
Edmonton and Calgary.
Well, it's an Alberta. It's an Alberta final. Another Alberta game.
Like cow. I don't even know if there's really ever been a late. It's like a late. It's just Labor Day Classic, right?
It's no different than Hamilton, guys. It's no different than Hamilton and Toronto.
Yeah, it's the exact same.
Don't confuse the fact that they don't like each other because one team has not had a very good run recently.
They haven't played yet this year, so that'll be the first time that those two teams play each other as well. I also learned about a month ago where the Banjo Bowl came from, because apparently Bombers fans said that called Rider fans banjo playing inbreds or something like that, and that's how the Banjo Bowl was born. So
remember the porch guy in Deliverance? Remember the guy in the porch in Deliverance?
I'm trying to remember.
If you've ever seen the movie Deliverance. Anyway.
I don't think I've ever watched that one.
Don't think I have either.
Well, it's pretty gory. it's Burt Reynolds and a few other actors that were well known back in the 80s. Yeah, thanks for letting me do this. I really appreciate Griff being invited in.
Guys, I always love talking CFL with the two of you. And my only question is, when we do this again, would we want to do this before Labor Day or after Labor Day?
Do it after Labor Day. I think I want to see how the chaos all unravels.
I like that. We get that chaos unraveling right before because the Labor Day chaos bleeds right into the NFL season. So it's kind of that perfect mix of football. It's that perfect mix of football bliss that we all love.
Absolutely.
Great. Anyway, for David Morisuti, for Frank Stanishi, I'm Griff. This has been episode number 304 of YWC Football Talk. I have another 3-person episode coming next Wednesday night that you guys are not going to